your name tag.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. We're in the midst of some technical difficulties.
Am I on? Am I on?
You're all echoey over there at the Rambob estate. Welcome, everyone, to Continuing the Conversation. We are Irenicast. I am Jeff.
It's your boy, Alan.
I'm Bonnie. Not sure if you can hear me.
Yep.
Okay, good.
I think Casey's now
Casey's
gone.
So that's great.
This is good. We're having some technical difficulties while people get into the room. That's fantastic.
Like these meetings are getting more and more like that Progressive insurance commercial.
A sneak peek backstage.
Was that a plug?
No.
Are they sponsoring us?
No, they're terrible.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I'm here.
Hear you. And as everyone is coming in, we are continuing the conversation. So we're talking about our most recent episode 175, where we revisited episode 59. Was it? Now I'm forgetting. We re-episode an episode that we did way back when on Atonement Theology.
Yes.
So
Terrible.
Can you hear me now?
I am sorry. Oh my goodness. Literally everything that could go
we
wrong.
are a mess.
But we're in it together.
Welcome, everyone, to Continuing the Conversation. And don't forget to give us your thoughts in the comments on this particular episode. But before we get into this episode, Bonnie, I want to throw over to you and have you tell everyone about intersections that we have coming up. This is a great opportunity for those of you that are listening to be a part of a group, have some connection via Zoom, which we're at this point we're all used to, I'm assuming. But Bonnie, tell us a little bit about intersections, and I will, while she's talking, I will put a link in the comments if you want to know more information.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Intersections is a support group, processing group. It's an opportunity for folks who are finding that they're shifting in their faith to explore that shift together with other people who are also shifting in faith. And I'm really lucky to co-facilitate with Alan and Casey. We've done this before in live format. So we're excited to offer it on Zoom. It starts October 8th, Thursday night. We'll go for 6 Thursday nights in a row. And we have already figured out exactly which topics we're going to cover. We think that they're really appropriate topics for anybody who is experiencing some sort of faith evolution. So we hope that you'll consider checking it out. And thanks for putting the link in the chat or comments. And Alan and Casey, you may have something to add too.
I just think intersections is wonderful. So if there's anybody who's going through the process of deconstruction or evolution in their faith, or just want a brave space to be able to explore some of that stuff while having, their personal integrity and agency honored and cherished, that's the kind of space. And it's so fun. I mean, I've gotten so much out of it over the years. And so I would recommend anyone who has a friend, maybe you're watching the stream and you're like, oh, I'm so worried about my niece or nephew. They're going through deconstruction and maybe they need some friends. You can shoot them this link and see if they'd be willing to be a part of it. So, yep.
I know that for a lot of the people that have joined us through the years, through intersections, one of the things that they will often say is, I found my tribe.
Right.
And what I'm hoping happens in these cohorts of up to 30. So, get your space now. There's still space while it lasts. What we're hoping is that these cohorts will be able to begin to build that tribe mentality, that feeling. So wherever you are on the journey, there will be people to meet you, greet you, and celebrate with you. And I think that that's sort of what I'm hoping happens in these groups that we're creating. And so I'm excited to do intersections this way. I feel like it's an opportunity for us to be together, especially in these times that feel so isolating, to find your tribe and to not even have to leave your home, honey. That's the way to do it. So.
Yes.
So
That's right.
if you are interested, please check out irenicast.com/intersections. Again, the comment is in, or the link is in the show notes. It's also, you're going to be seeing a lot on our Facebook page. If you're interested, you can go to that page, get any information. And if there's any questions you have that's not answered there, please feel free to email us anytime at podcast@irenicast.com. Or better yet, Bonnie@irenicast.com. She can answer your questions. So check that out. We wanted to let you know about that. We'll remind you again at the end of our live stream if you have forgotten by then. So this week, continuing the conversation, we're talking about atonement theology, which, thank you to, this is a listener suggestion that came to us, who had gone back and listened to some of our back catalog, and it was before Casey and Rajiv and Bonnie entered into the fold here, and I thought it was a great opportunity. We had talked a lot about revisiting old episodes to kind of, freshen things up and get some new perspective from our newer co-hosts, and this was a great opportunity to do it. It's a good conversation, and if you have anything to say about that, please comment. We want to acknowledge you in the comments. This is a conversation with you.
Yes.
5 of us talk together a lot, and we love it. We don't mind it, and we will do it if we if we have to, and we may accidentally do it, and just because that's our habit. But we do want to hear from you, so please feel
I
free
actually went to an ear, nose, and throat doctor today, and he asked me, he's like, "Do you talk for a living?" And I was like, "Oh man, yeah, I think I do." And sometimes I wish I talked less. But we're definitely here for all of our listeners who'd like to, talk about. If you're just watching, that's totally fine, and not comment at all. But if you'd be willing to just put, if you want to write something about what you think about atonement or about Jesus's execution, this is the place. This is the place and time to do it. So
while
by the way, that episode was wonderful, you guys. It was so good.
We
I
missed
wasn't
you,
in on
Alan.
it. I know I wasn't in on it, but I had so much fun. And Casey said, "It's your boy, Casey." He took that, took my spot, and I loved it, Casey. I think it was perfect. I think you should do that all the time.
I will not, but there you go.
Shannon, thank you so much. We love listening to your conversations. We appreciate it so much. So thank you for joining us.
Hi, Shannon.
Hello, Kason.
Kason, welcome. We're joining us. Kason, you just had a concert, or you're going to have a concert soon?
He did. He sure had a concert. He had a concert last Sunday, and I will tell you that there was nothing like putting it through my TV in the living room and drinking wine and dancing around my house. It was like a real concert. It was amazing. Yeah, he did a great job.
How lovely.
You got to listen to most of the episode today. Well, thank you. If you have any thoughts, Kason, please feel free to jump in. And hey, if you have a replay of your concert, share it in links. There's a lot of people that are listening that would probably love to hear that. So thank you for joining us today. So while we're waiting for some comments, and now that this episode is out and we've listened to it and all that kind of stuff, what is everyone's thoughts now that we've sat with it for a little bit? Alan, let's start with you, because I know you're chomping at the bit and you were on assignment that week. So tell us your thought about revisiting the old episode and then visiting this episode and getting all of that together.
It was magical in the sense that it was an episode, listening to you all talk about an episode we recorded 4 years ago. It's kind of a mind trip, right? Like where I was in 2016 is not where I'm at now, to some degree, but it was nice to hear your perspectives. And I think a lot of times, Christian theology, what I'm coming around to these days is that it can be so like irrelevant or like up in our heads, or not dealing with the main things of spirituality, more like these like niche pieces that, or niche, however you say that go really far out. And some of you in your responses like really brought it home, brought it back to like our lives and like what it would mean for our lives and for solidarity with each other. And I think that listening to that just kind of touched off a lot of good spiritual stuff for me. So like what does the execution of Jesus mean? Like what does it mean for our transformation and not necessarily for God's transformation? Or there's like so many levels that you can jump in on, right? Where is the meaning located? It's such a weird question. Like you could talk about from 1,000 feet away, from close up. And I appreciated some of the pastoral stuff that you all brought in. So that was fun. Like Well, first of all, Casey, you were singing a song. Oh man, what song was it? This is the air I breathe. And I was like, ooh, that takes me back. It takes me back. But I think where we're all at, where we've all kind of landed in progressive theology, and a lot of other thinkers would land too, is that like the strictly substitutionary model of the atonement just doesn't work for us and for our context anymore. And I appreciated Rajiv talking about how a lot of our idea of why Jesus died or something is centered around like us being like inherently bad or shameful, and letting that go, like decoupling that notion, has allowed much better interpretations of the atonement to come forward. So I have some ideas that came to my mind while I was listening, but I just wanted to start off by saying it was great and I loved it. And I'm sorry I wasn't there to keep score like I always do.
Yeah.
And
we didn't miss that part.
I was shouting out in the segment part. I was like, Casey asked, what's something that starts with C at a gay bar? And I was all, cuties! And then nobody could hear me when I was
you would have won.
I would have won, definitely. But one thing I'm interested in that kind of came to me that I've never thought about before is it was something that it was a combination of things that you all said. Like, I've heard the interpretation of Abraham and Isaac going to be killed by Abraham in progressive circles being the step away from child sacrifice in religion. So if you look at it from a 30,000 foot perspective, it's like we're now moving from these religions where child sacrifice is a part of ancient Near Eastern religions. And this is the story in the Jewish story where God stops that. Now there is no, like, God miraculously intervenes and now there is no child sacrifice. And I think, like, what could Jesus' death mean for us in our perspective of God? God as a king and an emperor and a domination over is like put to death in the middle of all of that. There's like this shift away from a God that looks like Caesar toward a God that is far more vulnerable and in solidarity with sinners who also get put to death, and in solidarity with people who are oppressed. So I think we can ask questions at different levels, but I'm interested in, like, it could be that this is like shifting our consciousness as a whole.
I think one of the big shifts that
Real quick, Annie, sorry, before
yeah.
you want to acknowledge Jason, thank you. This is the air I breathe, took you back as well. All you late 90s, early 2000 youth group evangelical kids, I'm sure that was either like took you back to a good place or was very triggering, and you might have had to take a U day for that after hearing about that. So
the air I breathed when I sang that song was sweaty, with adolescent sweat in a dark room somewhere, and such good memories.
I had different adolescent sweat in a much different place for much different reasons, but that's beside the point. Bonnie.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that
this is live. We cannot unsay
that part of, I think, what we tried to do in this episode was really extricate the cross and the execution of Jesus from any kind of atonement doctrine. So I think, like, even as we begin to talk about it, when we say atonement and then we equate that with execution of Jesus in any form, then I think we're in territory other than what we were trying to do with this episode.
Definitely.
I think of Neil deGrasse Tyson. Did I say this in the episode? I can't remember. It was early in the morning. But recently, someone was talking to Neil deGrasse Tyson about, you all know who that is. I'm sure you do, right? I'm sure Rajiv is like best friends with that guy. But he was talking about seeing war and violence as a primitive behavior or a primitive act, and that and I sort of am, as I'm spending more time with this episode, beginning to want to use that language around the understanding of crucifixion and how we have used it as in atonement ways, right? That is a primitive way of understanding what God requires of us, right? And Go ahead. Sorry, Jeff.
Sorry, real quick. Catherine and Dave, thank you so much for writing in and saying I have not listened to the episode yet, but you got an alert that we were live, so we tuned in. And then you're really looking forward to the episode. You hardly ever listen to episodes twice, but you listen to our Old Atonement episode twice. So thank you so much.
So we
hope that you get the same mileage out of this one as well. So thank you, Catherine and Dave, or Catherine and or Dave, depending upon who's watching, for joining us today. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Casey.
It's gone.
The eternal.
Yeah,
you were onto something. You were talking about this primitive notion of using violence as like God requiring violence or something like that. That's where you were headed.
That's right. And that if God is still speaking, or if God is still, we've been talking about the multiplicity of options in all of that, Bonnie, right? That's one of the things that you've really been, I think, the fingerprint for many of us. What are some other options we can pick up in meaning formation around this story that is still important? Just because that was the way some crazy old dudes decided to interpret this story does not mean that is the only way that we should have to interpret that story. And as we continue to grow in our own understanding of how violence impacts people, the trauma that it creates, I think it leverages us the opportunity to begin to talk about this story and find new forms of meaning that are just as important today as they would have been 2,000 years ago. That's sort of what I laid out in the episode. For me, when we talk about this whole thing around Jesus hanging out for 3 years in the hills of Galilee, and then starting his Jerusalem ministry by protesting and turning tables, and seeing what that cost him. There's a lot there for us to look at our own context and understand what this Jesus guy is inviting us into.
And I think from...
Go ahead, Bonnie.
And I was also wondering, what story will we use for an atonement theology? If we let go of the story of the sacrifice of Jesus as our atonement story, what story is in the scriptures that could be useful for an actual atonement theology, which is, how do you make amends? How do you make it right after harm has been so deeply caused?
I don't know that we look for an external story necessarily. We look for stories that will connect to our own personal trajectory, because that's the problem with substitutionary atonement. A major problem is it absolves people from having any ownership of the harm that they've caused. And it's not about being punitive. That's not where I'm coming from, although punishment might be an appropriate thing. But it is about atonement. It's about restitution and reconciliation, if possible. And sometimes there's consequences. You're pushed out of a society or a group. There's broken relationships, or you're incarcerated. So having those stories connect to our own personal trajectories is important. But I, having grown up Seventh-day Adventist, this atonement thing is really interesting, because a parallel that I draw to it is the early Adventist movement, or it was called the Millerite movement before it became Seventh-day Adventist. But they, using lots of great mathematical skills, they calculated that Jesus would be coming on October 22nd, 1844. And so people sold all their stuff. They were waiting for Jesus. There was this rock up in New England called Ascension Rock. And people were waiting in white robes for Jesus to come. And midnight comes and goes, and there's no Jesus. I mean, obviously there's no Jesus. So people are like, what are we supposed to do with this? So this was their conclusion. They were like, we got the right date, but we got the wrong event. So they were like, what we calculated the right thing, but what it was is in heaven, in the temple that's in heaven, based on the Jewish temple, the curtain between the holy place and the most holy place tore open, and now Jesus has entered to begin judging in the book of names,
the 1,000-year reign or whatever.
Yeah, so it's we got our math was right. We just got the wrong event.
Oh man,
we just showed up to the wrong dance.
Well,
So with atonement theology, it just feels like that. This awful thing happened. Like those people on Ascension Rock. They were embarrassed. They lost everything. They were trying to
Yes.
find meaning in what had just happened. So the early Jesus movement too, Jesus was killed, murdered. So they're desperate to find some meaning in what happened. And that lingered for a while. And so we can come up with some cockamamie stories to find meaning when we've suffered tremendously. But as we move on, we can learn and let some healing happen, and then try to make more meaning or new meaning out of it.
I think that's the point in the original episode, and one that gets picked up on here is that there are lots of meaning that comes from Jesus's execution that people have found from early on. The substitutionary theory was not the earliest one. It just wasn't.
Not even close.
Yeah, not even close. And so we think of it as the default, but that's not true. There's even within the Christian scriptures, there's a kaleidoscope of different theories around what the meaning of Jesus' death is. And I think you're right onto something, Rajiv, that it's like, how do we make sense of this person who is, for some people, like God come in the flesh and, love with us? What does that look like? And so if you're listening to this, we would love to hear what meaning you take out of it. Does it give you solace or solidarity, or how does it play a part in your past or in your faith now, or lack of faith, or however you would articulate that?
Right. And, Kaysen, thank you for giving us your thoughts. Kaysen says, I'm not sure in the moment how to pull all my thoughts together on Christian atonement and crucifixion. I wrestle with the Christian faith as a fellow unfundy ex-evangelical. One thing I always found odd was the worship of the cross, or especially the image of the crucifixion in churches, jewelry, tattoos, etc. If the point that many denominations focus on is that Jesus rose from the grave and lives, this may or may not be part of what you all are talking about, but it's just a thought. Right. I think going along with that thought, case, and I remember that one of the big shifts for me was that realization, while still considering myself an evangelical, that we spent so much time on Easter on the cross and the death and the violence of it, and resurrection was just something cool that we could put at the end of a play, but we never really talked about it, right? We never really, it wasn't the focus. It was always the cross. And I remember when I transitioned and started attending more mainline churches, I remember it was the first time I'd experienced that whole, maybe it doesn't happen as often as I think, it was just my context, but the whole people putting flowers on the cross, that's a mainline thing, right? Everyone?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I had never experienced that before. So it was this really cool, oh, that makes sense. That's a good way to incorporate the cross on Easter. So I think that juxtaposition or conflict between the cross and the resurrection is definitely something that is in the midst of this conversation for sure.
I mean, Paul's the early Christian thinker who talked the most about the cross, and it could be the case because he was someone who was a persecutor, because he used the sword against people. And for him, it was probably a radical conversion to be like, oh God, I'm on the wrong side of that power equation.
Right.
And that,
Catherine says, my mother used to point out, and I remember people pointing this out to me when I was a kid as well, but that Protestant crosses were always empty, while Catholic crosses still had Jesus on the cross. And Catherine, thank you for writing again. This is Catherine. She's one of our oldest listeners from New Zealand. So welcome. Thank you so much for bringing your thoughts in there.
I think we need to do a trip to New Zealand.
New Zealand.
Yeah.
And throw our old atonement theologies into Mordor or whatever. Let them burn.
That's right. Well, friends, I have to out to the landing spot, but I wanted to just check in with you today. So love you.
Thanks for being here, Casey.
Casey.
Peace, Casey.
Bye.
I want to jump back to Kaysen's comments and thoughts, because it's interesting. I have such a weird and ever-evolving relationship with both the cross and the crucifix. And to be clear, I'm not one of those people that holds on in any way, shape, or form to the substitutionary atonement idea. But there's something I find profoundly powerful about the crucifix.
Yeah.
Jesus on the cross. I'm not a fan of violence. I don't enjoy blood and gore, unless it's a movie that I know isn't true. But that in that one image, for me, in that one image, you see what's possible for humanity on both evil and good. There's pure innocence. I mean, this is the image that comes across to me. pure innocence, working for justice and trying to live a higher path. And then on the other side, this complete wanton desire for power, control, and supremacy. And the struggle, when the two actually come face to face, the one who's willing to commit violence tends to be the one that will beat the moment, kind of win the moment, but it won't squash the movement. And I think that image for me is really powerful.
And if I bring that through my like Trinitarian lens, because I do identify as a humanist and as a Trinitarian, I can like step back and forth between those things for some reason. They're just both in me. To think of like God being in solidarity with us, with the people who are oppressed, all the way down the rabbit hole. Like you said, there's all of humanity that's on display, the good and the bad. And it's like, there's an immensity to us as people and as individuals. Like we all have our shadow side. We all have our higher natures and things. And to have God present and be in solidarity with, the sinners or the outcast or the oppressed, to me, the crucifixion is that like, it's almost like a down payment of solidarity, like, I don't think the point of Martin Luther King's life, Jr.'s life, was that he was killed. That's not the point of his life at all. But it still means something that he was. It still means like he paid a price in solidarity with all the people that he was working with, and like proved that he was willing to be committed to this all the way down to the end. And I think when we have, people doing that work, I'd like to think that God is in it too. And not just in a way that, is completely invulnerable.
Right. Well, Catherine, we may take you up on this. Please do come over when our borders reopen. No one wants Americans in their country right now.
Well, I mean, New Zealand is like COVID free, right?
They were for a little bit, but then they had like two. I don't know. Like
I'm sure Catherine could tell us.
Yeah, I know Catherine. And by the way, Catherine, I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name right, but Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister, is one of my heroes. She's amazing.
We may all be coming over November 4.
Right. And then Jason brings up one thing I remember about the gruesomeness of the crucifixion is my youth group when I was 12 did a field trip to the movies to see The Passion of the Christ. And honestly, it was traumatic. I've never watched it again, nor have had the desire to do so. That was like the only rated R movie evangelicals were allowed to watch for a little bit because it was, the reality of that. And I think that's an important point that I don't know if we didn't really address in the issue, the episode itself, but our depiction of the crucifixion and how those things sear into our mind and give us the because it's the climax of most Jesus films. And I think that is I think that's a good point. And that movie in particular was not just the movie, but that was a cultural milestone in evangelicalism in terms of what that movie meant and how. I mean, it's still the number one gross rated R movie. Deadpool might have overtaken it, but
I was married to Jeff's sister for 10 years, and we were dating at the time. And that was one of our dates, was to come over to the house and watch Passion of the Christ, because that's what you did, right? When you're evangelicals. Oh,
I think what's really important to remember about those, like going to the Passion of the Christ, is the context with which you went to it. It's one thing if you're watching it as like, here's a myth, this great epic story. And it's another thing when you're told you need to see what Jesus endured for your sin. And that was the context that many of these youth groups went to the movies with. And you need to like experience that level of suffering because Jesus did that for you.
And in fact, that was something God wanted to do to you, and Jesus is stepping in your place. And so like me, I'm sitting there in the theater watching it, and I'm like, this is how God feels about me. This is what God wants to do to me because of who I am. And
with what you deserve.
Right. Yeah, with what I deserve. And I think that kind of like theology, it keeps people coming back, right? It's kind of an abusive thing to think of it that way.
Absolutely.
It's totally an abuse cycle.
Absolutely.
Especially when you're working with adolescents and not going to internalize that. It was either like God wants to do this to you, or this happened to Jesus because of you. Like, it's still like this weird place. Sela says, my dad showed me the Passion of the Christ dozens of times, starting when I was about 6.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, I was just,
Yeah.
Bonnie and I were educators in a Christian school at the time. And, even then I was just like, this is madness. This movie is just inappropriate. And I remember students, because it was a K-12 campus, kindergarten students would come to school and be like, oh yeah, my parents took
I
me.
was teaching kindergarten, and
Yeah.
I wanted to like protect my students from the story. But then one of the kindergartners had seen it and couldn't stop talking about it, because obviously when you experience something traumatic like that, you're going to talk about it when you're 5 years old. And so now all these other kids were experiencing this vicarious trauma through the story. Yeah, it was, I wish that movie would just go away, to be honest.
Well, and the people that were responsible for making the movie. I mean, Mel Gibson is not a model of stable behavior or
Well,
stable
look at all the
thinking.
other movies that he made. It's a
Well, and
glorification
then-
of violence is the key
Yeah.
part of his
And the
life.
guy,
Like,
Jim
Yeah.
Caviezel, the guy that played Jesus, he was like so willing to be into it. Like he broke ribs in some of those scenes. I mean, it's just like,
Well, there's some recent stuff in the news about Jim Caviezel and his opinions on things right now, but the Mel Gibson thing is actually very fascinating. And stop me if I get too nerdy on film stuff. And if you watch his films, I don't know if it's his Catholic upbringing or something personal, is that he's always fighting this conflict between ultra violence and pacifism. If you look at Hacksaw Ridge, if you look at Braveheart, if you look at Passion
The Patriot.
the Patriot, like there's this whole, it's this really like fascinating thing that's happening in Mel Gibson in terms of how he's juxtaposing those two things and almost like justifying one as a means to another. I mean, we would talk about nonviolence. I could do a whole study on that one anyway. But yeah, that movie is the epitome of it, obviously being where Jesus is. Nancy brings up a good point. I don't want to move on too quickly, but she said, having come from St. Anselm background, the thought of separating atonement from the cross was a mind-blowing concept. Maybe the story of the adulterous woman is a better story.
I like that.
God just forgive without an event?
Mm-hmm. I think we should be looking for stories that help us with atonement. And I think our scripture is full of them. Like I love that.
well, that is a great story. And I think it's a great story of forgiveness. I don't think it's a great story for atonement, because really, where are the dudes? Where are the people that accused this person? Where was the other fella involved? I mean, there's all these like crooks involved, and they're not part of the story.
But maybe because she was let go, that in and of itself was an act of holding them accountable. Like, we don't know exactly what the social context was, but like if you accuse somebody and you bring that person out and you're like, this is the person that you should be punishing for whatever reason, and then some authority figure says, no, not going to do that because, who else doesn't deserve to be punished at some one point or another? That kind of turns the gaze back at the accusers.
Right.
One thing,
I mean, look at the narrative today in our culture in terms of just Me Too. And it is the abusers that get the spotlight. They're the one that become the main characters of the story. And to have the victim of conspiracy would really the way my understanding of how Jewish rule or communities worked back then is that the reason that God says, not God says, the reason that the 10 Commandments say don't bear false witness is because it's a form of conspiracy. You need 2 or 3 to testify against someone. So if you're getting together and testifying against someone, you're doing more than just lying. You're creating a conspiracy. And if they were bringing this woman accused and she was falsely accused or whatever, that there's action in there and she becomes the center of the story instead of the accusers.
So I was, the question is like, what other stories are there for the atonement? And I think even within some of the discussion of the cross, like in Romans and things, I think that because we've been trained the way that we are to read how we do, we skip over so much. a lot of the argument, especially that Paul makes, and that later on Irenaeus, one of the early church thinkers, is that it was actually Jesus's life that was the atonement piece, that his faithfulness, it was the faithfulness of Jesus, it was the love and the commitment to justice of Jesus and the way that he lived that actually like recapitulated what humanity was supposed to be like. Like Adam failed and here's Jesus, now he's getting it successfully done, and he's like living the kind of life that Israel or humanity in itself should have lived. And so I don't, I think Adam is not a literal historical figure, so I'm not into like the math of recapitulation, but I still think like on a consciousness level, it's Jesus's life that inspires me to like unity with God, that brings that out of me. And I would say like his death is part of his life, like not the other way around. It's a moment in his faithfulness, and it was actually the faithfulness of Jesus that mattered the most.
Right.
That we can believe in this vision even when things are as hard as what he faced.
Well, and that's a common interpretation of Matthew, specifically in the Jesus's trial in the wilderness, is each of those trials represents a failure in Israel's past, and it's a redemption of that particular story, and it becomes about Jesus's life and how Jesus lives that through and everything. Real quick, this last we'll say on Passion, but she just this is actually a legit thing, that there is a Passion of the Christ sequel coming, and it like literally this is no joke. They're trying to get the movie made. It's going to be a sequel, and it's going to be Jesus going into hell to take the keys of life and death. Like that's going to be the movie. So
oh my gosh,
that might be
That
cool.
might be more interesting, actually.
I kind of want to see it, but
I'd be into that.
Also, so one other thing I want to bring out is like a psychological reading of the crucifixion and what it meant. Like, I think a lot of spiritual thinkers and leaders will say we're not transformed unless we experience great love or great suffering, and those tend to be like portals through which we come into some wider consciousness or larger consciousness. And one thing you said in the episode over and over that I loved is like the suffering is not the point. The suffering is not the point. It's not the point of life. It's not the point of faithfulness. But the truth is, sometimes in human experience, what human hasn't suffered? Who of us haven't suffered on some level? And like the suffering of the ego death and of like losing our perspective, our handle that we have on the world, and we're trying to manipulate and control everything. Going through some kind of death like that for a lot of people is the beginning of their spiritual blossoming and resurrection and coming into something deeper. So I think there's a lot of ways you can read Jesus's execution. And I like the liberation theology perspective probably the most myself. That's something that, Jesus' solidarity with the oppressed. But I think there's other ways that we can understand it too.
well, any other thoughts, Bunny, about this episode or this topic before I think we'll close out for this week?
We didn't really talk about it in the episode itself, but one of the things that I remember as I was beginning to ask my own questions and look for answers for myself, and then coming into information from historians that knew the time period, and they were basically, this whole image was shattered. So I had, the trial and crucifixion of Jesus was like a major spectacle. There were crowds, there were throngs, they all knew who Jesus was. And the historians are saying probably not. He was executed like a common criminal. There's a few people at the foot of the cross, there for the moment. Nobody really even knew. Other than his crew. And I was just like, what? And I just remember that really shaking stuff in my mind, because the pageantry around that, the storytelling around that, kind of one of these really important big fish stories. And I just remember that being emotionally shattering. And this is after I had kind of distanced myself from some of the theological stuff, but I just remember that being so troubling to my soul at the time. And because I had this great imagination around the whole thing.
I think what I've I hope I said this in the original episode. I can't really remember, but it was us who required Jesus' death, not God, right? It was our systems that said this has to happen. And I think that for a lot of us, psychologically, we're still there. For God to love me, I need some sort of bloodshed. I need something to really match it. For some of us who have done truly horrible things, like the crucifixion is a powerful story of some sort of writing. And I think, yeah, anyway, it was wonderful. The whole episode was great. For those of you who are listening, like maybe the death of Jesus was used in a way. One thing I'm really interested in that you just brought up earlier is how we use the death of Jesus to avoid accountability, right? That alone is a reason to like kind of move away from that. Jesus died, so everything's fine, and I don't have to take care of the things in my life that I need to. I know Rajiv kept coming to that over and over.
But we all know in practice that that's a selective, like if you're angry or you struggle with greed or whatever, but if you have certain quote unquote sexual sins or whatever, then that does not apply. So I mean, the practical nature of that is, I mean, we all remember it, we all know, you know what I mean?
Right. But no one in those circles are repenting the sin of male supremacy.
Right. Exactly.
Or white supremacy.
Right.
It's like this is what God wants.
Right.
Yeah. So some people are sharing some more thoughts that they had, and
oh, cool.
Yeah, Nancy says good stuff, and a thought that they had toward the end of the episode. I think they're in the middle of typing it.
Mhm.
So yeah, one thing I talked about the atonement theory with some of my colleagues, and I was telling them about how it inspires me that God is in solidarity with us all the way down the rabbit hole of humanity, and that was the thing that came out was, well, what would people who have been abused say about that? That's so often used to keep people in their place or something, that they should just endure abuse because that's what Jesus did. And how do you like navigate that? And it was a really good question.
That was a pretty public response from John Piper, who
I remember that,
advocated for enduring abuse if you're in an abusive marriage. So
there's a lot of great scholarship out there about that very issue. Womanist scholarship is great at addressing that question, and which I think Rajiv kept bringing out.
Right. Nancy says, "Are we free for freedom of religion or to protect our own worship or our neighborhoods? When God sent Jesus to shake things up, we crucified him." I mean, yeah, there's a lot of
yeah. So the question she's asking is, are we do we have freedom of religion to protect our own worship or our neighbors? That's good stuff.
Yeah,
hopefully our neighbors, but good Lord.
I mean, I'd like to keep my own freedom of religious practice.
Yeah, but there's like John MacArthur. Yeah, but John MacArthur's suing the state to be able to bring 10,000 people together with no masks and social distancing because that's his religious freedom.
But
that's happening
that doesn't bother me at all. It's like people have free will, dude. It's like you want to go. I mean, you have scientific information. You want to go
But it puts everyone else at risk, though. It puts all of society at risk, not just them.
I agree. Yeah. Democracy has consequences.
Yep. And so does individual freedom. It has consequences.
And Sela, in my experience, atonement theology breeds hypocrisy. I'm telling you,
Amen.
Sela,
The traditional atonement theology, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. Well, we could do a whole.
Yeah. I was gonna say, we forget the part where Jesus says, "Take up the cross and follow me." Like, how does that fit into atonement theology? I think that's probably actually more like what atonement theology looks like.
I'm thinking.
But we instead like to focus on the death covering us.
Right.
And that's not what "take up the cross and follow me" means at all.
Yeah, so, take up the cross means solidarity, right?
Well, take up the cross means be vulnerable.
Yes, exactly.
Be persecuted.
It also means don't dump your baggage on other people. Carry your own junk.
But not for the sake of being persecuted. That's really important to distinguish. But because when you are in solidarity with the oppressed, the powerful forces are going to come after you.
Mhm.
Yeah, but then you're interpreting who the powerful forces are, right? Because for every, all the alternative or anti-protesters that are out there, they're wholeheartedly, a lot of them are in that camp where they believe they're carrying their cross, that they believe that they're standing up for.
Sure.
I mean, John MacArthur, Alan, you mentioned him earlier. I mean, that's a key prime example of someone who's, probably believes wholeheartedly he's carrying the cross.
But the word that Bonnie just said that we skip over way too easily is vulnerability. If anything else in all of Christianity, it's this demonstration of vulnerability and also doing the hard work of confronting power at the same time. It's this beautiful mix.
And does John MacArthur do that? I think
No.
that's probably a question that could help us to discern.
Well, I'm being judgmental, but I went to his school and had, a scholarship and got to know the teachings and stuff, and it's not a celebration of vulnerability. So that's my perspective, my judgmental one.
Well, all right. Well, unless there's any other thoughts, we'll give it just a few seconds. So I just want to remind everyone to check out Intersections, irenicast.com/intersections if you're interested in that. And that'll be a 6-week gathering that's coming up with some great information on that. And our next episode is coming out on the first Tuesday of October. And yeah, any final thoughts from either of you before we call it a day?
Is that the episode on compassion that's coming out? Maybe.
I don't remember at this point. I think it's
we've done a lot of work in the last couple of days.
Not the one on that one. It's
okay.
Covering. I can't remember.
Our scheduling's been intense the last couple of days. Thank you everybody who's in this with us. Just wanted to say this is big stuff. This is big, world making stuff, religion making stuff, identity making stuff, and I really appreciate all of our listeners who have sent in comments and emails, and it's wonderful to know that none of us are alone, that we're all working on this huge kaleidoscope of interpreting meaning and taking what we've been given and doing something beautiful with it.
We could end on a lighter note with some dad jokes or something.
I have one, but it's not a good one. Oh, wait, I can't tell jokes. I forgot. That was that was a rule. Yeah, that was a rule instituted 2 years ago. I don't know how long we've been doing this for, but it feels like forever.
Still feels right though, Alan.
It feels like I haven't been able to tell a joke in a really long time. If you're in the comment section, you could say, "I want to hear Alan's jokes," and maybe people will change their mind.
We probably won't though.
Lobby.
We should sign off before then.
Yeah, I have an off-air button right here. So, all right, well, thank you everyone so much for joining us for continuing the conversation, and we will see you again in this format after our next episode. And don't forget to subscribe. And don't forget that if you enjoy and appreciate the work that we're doing here, you can always donate to the cause. We are a nonprofit organization. We have a lot of stuff going on, including Intersections, as we've talked about. So your donations are tax deductible, and you can do that at irenicast.com/PayPal. We appreciate all of you that have given so far, and it makes our day that we get to do this and connect with all of you. So everyone have a wonderful rest of your week. And for this week, I'm Jeff.
It's your boy, Alan.
I'm Bonnie.
This is Rajiv. Peace.
Thanks for continuing the conversation. Everyone take care.